Hey guys, today I'm going to be telling you all about the European side of the colonization of Africa, the scramble of Africa, the European perspective, if you will, about the causes and effects of the conquest of Africa by Europe. Europe, as you know, was in control of most of Africa by late 19th century. What Europeans did to Africa, the Americas, and some parts of Asia is called imperialism. Now, what could that mean?
Okay. Imperialism is the acquisition of control or influence over other nations by a nation by economic, political, or military means.
Thanks, Josefa. Now, about the conquest of Africa in general. Before the 19th century, European countries mainly had trading posts and settlements along the coast, and they left inland matters to the locals. While engaging in lucrative trade, though not much of it, as trade with Americas and Asia was of much more value, and Africa had developed a bad reputation as the white man's grave, felling people with diseases that didn't even have names for. However, they had some influence on local matters. The Portuguese were one of the first colonists. They established a system of forts along the Cape of Good Hope route, and it was the Portuguese who signed the first of the major deals with the African leaders, usually for slaves. Then came the Dutch in the early 1600s, primarily engaging in trade, also establishing a few forts. During this time, the Europeans, mainly the Portuguese and the Dutch, attacked each other for supremacy over these waters. During this time, other European nations like Sweden, England, France, Denmark, and others were starting to muscle in. They too competed with each other. After the Glorious Revolution and a lot of liberation in trade, English activity started to pick up, and by early 1700s, they were the biggest traders in that region. The triangle trade also happened during the period mentioned above, as demand for slaves started to pick up near 1500 when they realized the local natives were not for any good for manual labor. Wars in Europe in 1700 increased British naval supremacy over this area and made them the major traders in Africa. By this time, the European powers had seized some land along the coast, but they didn't really venture inland. The British abolished the slave trade in 1807, and the Royal Navy patrolled the west coast, searching for slaves, except those of Spain and Portugal. And by middle of this century, missionaries started infiltrating African society. Additionally, the Industrial Revolution increased travel and trade capacity. By this time, the European countries had signed many agreements with the locals, including those of support in exchange for trading privileges, and thus they were forced to interfere, like with the Ashanti, who threatened some of the British allies and attacked ex-Dutch and now British trading posts, forcing them to create a large military presence in Africa. This was the state of affairs of rivalry and constant tension till the middle of the second half of the 19th century, with only an expansion in influence and some more territory taking. In the 1870s and 80s, some European leaders like King Leopold II of Belgium and the French in North Africa wanted to expand their territory. Leopold, the chap in this photo, organized a series of explorations and entreaties that made Congo his territory, his personal territory. Their advances inspired other nations to advance in Africa to even the balance or tip the balance in their favor, and resulted in a scramble to claim the territory before other people did. So, something called the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 85 was organized by Otto von Bismarck, with countries divvying up their spheres of influence and laying the ground rules for the next few decades. Thus, European countries started claiming their claim to the continent. Here are the British possessions, here are the French colonies, the German ones, which were absorbed by Britain and France after the First World War, the Belgian colonies, and the Italian territory. I shall tell you about the causes and effects of the European conquest of Africa and use French West Africa as an example. So first, what is French West Africa? Nishant, if you will. French West Africa consisted of the provinces of Mauritania, Senegal, French Sudan, French Guinea, Ivory Coast, Upper Volta, Dahomey, and Niger. French involvement in West Africa started with trading posts in Senegal in the early 1600s. Till the mid 1800s, the French did not interfere much in local affairs, trading and making some alliances. However, the French started expanding their control over this part of Africa after taking Tunisia as a protectorate and establishing Brazzaville and French Congo. Many countries joined in as protectorates, thus much of West Africa was added to the French Empire. It will be worth noting that initially, the French wanted to make many people in their colonies French citizens with all the rights that entails. They implemented this in Senegal, and the Senegalese had all the rights of French citizens and could vote to represent themselves in the parliament. However, due to the rush of the 1880s and the 90s and the conflicts that followed, it was just too late. So, what was the causes of colonization? Why did the Europeans do this stuff? I just told you they did. One of them was the rivalry between the European nations. During the 1880s, a complex state of alliances and rivalries existed between the European nations, but they were a bit loose and ever changing. For example, the British and French were rivals, but between then and the World War One, they became friends, and German Empire and Austria-Hungary were allies, though not 10 years before they had been enemies. However, every nation watched the other powers and strove to advance ahead of them. Thus, when previously unclaimed properties, unclaimed in quote marks, were claimed by a country like, say, Belgium claiming Congo, the others raced to get more land to match up or advance over the others in terms of resources or to secure already valuable property. The next 30 years, a ferocious rate of colonization took place, and the result is displayed in the map in front of you. Causes fueling the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a period of great innovation, change, and upheaval. Cumbersome and inefficient industries were rejuvenated by new ideas and inventions and increased productivity greatly. For example, American cotton supplies rose from 1.5 million tons a year in 1790 to 85 million tons in 1810. Coal production in Britain increased from 2.54 million tons in 1700 to 224 million tons in 1900. With the increased production capability thus produced, factories had to have raw materials to stay in work, cheaply if possible. Of course, Europe had many resources, but not much when compared to Africa. Africa was rich in mineral and fertile soil. In Africa, many tropical plants like indigo and sugarcane could grow, which held immense benefits for industries back home in Europe. In the start, Europeans, like the French, limited themselves to trade to secure raw materials. Additionally, the Industrial Revolution was a bit late in coming to France because of the authoritative power exerted by the monarch and some of his successors. However, when demand for raw materials of all kinds, both for machinery and human consumption, grew higher and sometimes supplies disrupted and people killed due to local conflicts, France stepped in West Africa and Central Africa to study the supply. Of course, France also came in there to ensure they got everything at a cheap price. However, it must be noted that through a period that was bringing great prosperity to its people, like the rest of Europe, and its political and military efforts to secure raw material is justified by the results which we can see around us today, like the great cities, instantaneous communication, the internet, the great standard of living, and so many affordable goods. Their cause is the spread of Christianity in Africa. Christianity is the most practiced religion in Africa, practiced by most people in sub-Saharan Africa. However, the inhabitants of this region did not become Christian until the arrival of the Europeans. This was mostly accomplished by missionaries. Many missionaries provided much needed services in Africa like schooling and medicine, and converted people too in the meantime. France, like all other European countries, wanted to be seen as defending and expanding the Christian faith, and this made it convenient for missionaries to go to Africa and spread Christianity while taking more territory from the non-Christians. The map here shows the distribution of Christianity, and this graph here shows how Christians increased in the share of the populace in time. Eventually, many people in French West Africa and most people in French Central Africa decided to convert. Another cause was natural proceedings, the strong taking advantage of weakness in other countries. It's only natural that strong countries take over the weak and the divided. It's happened throughout history. Many of the modern nation states were once a collection of kingdoms and empires. India, for one, was only unified a few times. The modern United Kingdom was divided into Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England, and the modern Germany was a collection of German speaking states that used to be reasonably independent. Most of Africa was a bit weak then. Many of its parts were not under a central authority, and after the fall of the Mali and Songhai empires, no new powers of the same magnitude had established themselves in West Africa. When the Europeans came first, ostensibly to trade, the African leaders were happy to sell away their goods and people in exchange for modern firearms and comfort Western goods for use of the Hierarchylons, a great weakness which but paved the way for the weakening of their institutions, constant rivalry, and fighting fueled by modern weapons, which led to anarchy, which was in some part elevated by the conquest by European countries. Many local countries, after being severely weakened, agreed to fall under the French boot as they were weak in military and economic terms, while France held a clear superiority. Thus, European countries, including, they did what was natural, taking advantages of the situation and conquering weaker countries who had a lot of resources, as any reasonable profit minded individual would have done. Now, for the effects of colonialism. The first of these effects was the introduction of modern European automated technology. Africa at that time was not very modernized. Some armies still fought with arrows, spears, and such, and machinery had not made much of a headway there, except in weaponry and trivial items. European conquest brought, for example, modern resource extraction technology. Mali had significant reserves of gold, Mauritania had iron, and Central Africa is rich in uranium. The efficiency of mining with the new techniques thus increased. They also brought with them steam engine technology, enabling faster travel by machine-powered boats and vehicles, more of modern weaponry like improved machine guns, and other machinery relating to fields ranging wide from communication, like radio and telegraph, to optics, like very precise microscopes. This brought much of the continent of Africa to the same frame as the rest of the world. Additionally, the Europeans were able to make more of the industrial products resources they got from Africa for a lower price, which they were able to sell in their possessions, which were in Africa, aiding the distribution of the latest goods and technology in Africa. The second in my list is the introduction of modern sanitation, education, and medicines. Europeans brought many of their technology and practices with them, including those of hygiene and sanitation. Before the Europeans came, sanitary facilities were pretty basic in most parts of Africa. Sanitary facilities made by foreigners were used for themselves, were adopted by the locals, and everybody started using them. The Europeans also introduced measures to improve hygiene, for example, establishing systems to transport water in many places. Today, Senegal, a former colony of France in French West Africa, has one of the most advanced sanitation systems, one of the highest literary rates, and is one of the most peaceful countries in Africa, while Ethiopia, which is never colonized, is struggling. Additionally, the French implemented modern education for natives, or they tried to, mostly in Senegal, in an attempt to establish a native officer class. This attempt helped in the prosperity of Senegal enormously. Additionally, many African children gained an education and the ability to read and write from missionaries like those of France. Due to advances in science due to the Industrial Revolution, medicines such as quinine to treat malaria and vaccine for smallpox were discovered or invented to mitigate and cure diseases. This, in addition to allowing Europeans to explore more of Africa, helped improve their health in Africa. The third is the unification of fractured tribes and provinces into large nations. Most of Africa was sparsely inhabited, and Africa was made up of small nation-states consisting of few hundred or thousand villages, with an occasional large country. Additionally, Africa is and was famously divided by ethnic, religious, and cultural lines. West Africa consisted of many countries too, like Mali, Songhai, Benin, Great Fulo, Morocco, etc. Many of them were rivals, and a huge amount of potential, resources, and lives were wasted in conflicts between them. France brought these states under control, unified them into a single political entity, French West Africa, and increased the efficiency of resource utility. The infrastructure that the colonists left behind to work a large country is key to the functioning of many of these African countries today, and without it, m- many of those might have fragmented. Last is increased communication and trade to and within the African continent. The introduction of modern technology, mentioned before, helped bring Africa on par with the rest of the world. By 1910s, Dakar could talk to Paris just like London could talk to Washington. Due to the European dependence on African raw materials, a lot of trade happened to and from Africa, of people, raw materials, finished goods, etc., helping to spread African culture and bring back products and stock from other places. Additionally, due to the importance of Africa, the French built roads and railroads connecting French West to French Northern and French Central Africa, most of the major cities at least, and building steamer docks across the river and improved harbors, helping connect the continent with its other parts and the rest of the world.